So yeah, we're building high-low, right? Number guessing game. Gonna be super duper fun. Very kind of concepts of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all together. What you didn't see is technically this little card has an animated flip to show us the right number. We'll see if we get that pulled off. But I was too low down here when I guessed the right number, so I don't think we saw it. But let's kind of start putting this together. Sound good? What I am going to do is start a brand new project, right? So yesterday, created a project, had an index.html, had a CSS file. Not worrying about any of that stuff from yesterday. This is a brand new project. You'll notice here in VS Code, I have no files in the folder once again. And so we want to create a file, start linking it together, start doing all that fanciness. And so what I want to do is just kind of walk through this process real quick. So if I just open up VS Code, okay, there's a couple different ways that you can get a project started. VS Code typically will just reopen whatever project was last opened. So if you open up VS Code today and you have like code from yesterday and you want to create a brand new project, what you can do is you can click on File and you can say, I'm gonna click New Window. New window should open up without a particular project open. Okay, so cool. Hopefully we can get there. So if you go to like File and New Window, that should work for you, or Control-Shift-N. On a Mac, it's probably, yeah, Command-Shift-N or the little VS Code icon. And then you want to open up a folder. When you click Open Folder, you can pick anywhere on your computer that you put your code. I generally recommend putting all of your code, all of your different projects into like a single folder. So right here, I have like the, my user folder, and then there's a whole bunch of other folders in here. One thing I typically recommend is you'll create just like a brand new folder from your user folder and call this like code, or what we tell students is CodeWorks, right? And you're going to put all of your CodeWorks projects essentially inside of this folder. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to click into the CodeWorks. And today I want to start a brand new project. And so in order to do that, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create another new folder. And I'm going to call this high-low. High-low and hyphen in between the two words, not spaces, because that's going to help with your padding on your computer. So we click high-low, and then we say select folder. And what that's going to do is that's going to open up VS Code essentially in a project format. And then from here, we know that, okay, we're kind of have this isolate condition, and we can start building out this particular project, and we're not going to have like weird code affecting us from like yesterday. So hopefully that kind of helps. You can also do this all from the command line. So hover over here, let's create a brand new file. This is going to be index dot, and what language are we writing in? The very first get started for the web. HTML, yep. So index.html, the reason why we're always going to start with that file is because that's the one that the browser initially loads. And then if you want to load JavaScript or you want to load CSS, it all has to be linked through the HTML file, okay? So the HTML file is what we call the entry point to the application. And so it's the one file that will go load all the other files if it needs to. I'm just going to dump in that initial like skeleton. So exclamation point and tab is going to get me that basic skeleton. And when you kind of see this mode right here, where I have these little like gray highlights over these other words, and then device width is highlighted, I'm actually kind of in template mode right now. And so in order to get out of template mode, I have to hit escape, or I can click somewhere. If you just press tab, it's going to tab you between those items. And then I hit shift tab to go back. Template mode usually gives you the ability to change a couple little things about the snippet that you just put in. So like right here, let's do high-low. And we'll even put in a little like card emoji, I guess. And then I'll press escape and I'll get out of template mode. Also, if you're like, man, how did you get that emoji in there? The hotkey on a Windows computer is Windows period for popping up like your emoji selector. And I can never remember the key combination on Mac, but I think it's a 3-button combination. And I really like using emojis when we are teaching because it's a really fast way to kind of throw in a picture, quote unquote, without having to like go source 1,000 images and things of that nature. And then I'm also going to click this go live button down here. And that should pop up a preview of my website here for what we are going to be building. And so let's actually dock this over here, and then we'll dock this over here. Okay. Control B will close my sidebar for me, and we should be kind of good to start working on this. So if I just type in hello, it's kind of a review from yesterday, hit save, everything's working there. So the go live button is in the bottom bar, and it will only be there if you've installed the extension. I have live server. There's another one called live preview. Let me install this one real quick, and I'll just show you kind of the difference between live preview and live server. Either of them work, and both of them work totally fine. When you have live preview installed and you open up an index HTML file, you have this little icon right here that will open up the browser, same idea, but it puts it directly inside VS Code for you, which that can sometimes be nice, where it's all in the same window, right? And if you don't want it in the same window, I think you can click on this button, yeah, open in browser, and it will automatically go open it in your browser for you as well. Code on one side of the screen, preview on the other, just make sure it works. So we'll erase that. Oh, dang. I don't even have to like hit save and it updates. So that's kind of nice. Cool. I will often hit Control S to save. I also will often just automatically use various hotkeys. So if you ever see like something just like happen on my screen, and you're like, how did you do that? Just ask, because most likely I hit a key combination and I forgot to call it out. A couple of things that we want to do today, okay, so again, is we want to have like a card on the screen. We want to have a bunch of buttons on the screen. We're going to need some JavaScript. We're going to need some CSS. We're going to need some HTML. And when it comes to building out an application, oftentimes you want to slow way down and be like, okay, I saw what I want to build. I have maybe like the preview or I have a mock, but instead of trying to build the entire application at once, you want to break it down into smaller and smaller pieces. That way you can focus on a single thing at a time. Okay. So for example, if I bring this back up, we have a lot of stuff going on here, right? We've got this little header bar, right? We got, some sort of like link right here that if you click it, it takes you to the home page. Maybe we can tie in a reset button. We've got a card here, and then we've got tons and tons and tons of buttons drawn to the page. And when you click one, it starts printing additional things to the screen. Okay. What I don't want to do is I don't want to be like, build all of it all at once, right? I want to think, how can I build a single button? How can I build that header? How can I build just this card? And then I'll worry about tying everything back together. Okay. And so there's often this mistake that a lot of students will make, that it's like, oh man, like I need to build the app, right? And it's like, but focus on your first problem. What is the very first problem to address? Okay. And for me, I like to just start at the very top of the page, right? I want one of those little headers. Let's just kind of build it out with plain old HTML to start. Okay. And then when we are ready to build our first button, then we'll start moving into the JavaScript. Let's see if we can do this type of idea. A division. Absolutely. That's what I would do as well. So we have a division. Okay. And let's give this division a name. It is class. Very good. Okay. So we do class. Okay. And we want to name this thing. And so let's call this our, header. Because what it is, right? And then inside that header, let's dump in a p tag and let's put in the words high-low, right? And we'll even get a little bit fancy. We'll put in another like card emoji. Okay. And I like that. Okay. But if we look at the preview, high-low is in the center of the page. Okay. And it's got some fancy coloring. It looks like we also have changed the font family and things of that nature. But how do I get my text to the center of the screen? Is that an HTML thing or is that a CSS thing? Yeah. That's a CSS thing, right? And so immediately, I now need a CSS file, right? Like I've written just a couple of lines of HTML and it's like, okay, cool. I'm already ready to like jump over to my next language, okay, or my next file. And so let's go ahead and do that. So if I open up my little sidebar here, click this button, okay, or Control or Command B will toggle that for you. Also, by default, I believe this will show up on the other side of the screen. I've moved it over here for like demo purposes, but it shouldn't really matter as long as you click on this icon. You can click on this plus button and we can create a brand new file. And let's call this our style.css. Okay, we'll press enter, pops in. So from our style CSS, how do we target the header? Or how do we target that division? Yes, you have to point to it, right? And so think about that point. That's a point, right? So the period. So if I put in a period, I'm now saying go find a class, and then I just need to put in the right name for the class. Okay. So period says go find a class, and then we'll say header. Okay. And then inside of this header, let's go ahead and use our text align, and let's put it to the center, and let's save it. Okay. Now I have a question. Why did my text not move to the center of my screen? I wrote the CSS is correct. I have the HTML is correct. But there's one big thing that's missing. And that step is we have to link the file in. So I created a CSS file, but it's just sitting on my computer doing nothing. As soon as I use a link tag, I can say style.css, and notice my text jumped right to the center of the screen. Okay. So if I typo this, it bumps back. If I do it correctly, it throws it in. So that's pretty neat. I like that. When we look at the preview here, we've got some like fancy colors going on. So let's go ahead and jump over into here. And let's set the background color. And I don't know, it's like close-ish to that color. I think that's a little too gray. So we could probably bring that down a little bit. Yeah, kind of like that. What's nice here is when you're in CSS, you click on this little dot, you can bring up this little extension here, and then you can just find the color that you want. By default, I think this is going to throw it in RGB format. So this is red, this is green, this is blue. So the red value, the green value, the blue value. And these numbers go from no red, so 0, to 255, which is full red. And so if I wanted like pure red, I would do 255, no green, no blue. And now if you kind of understand your colors, you'd be like, okay, but what happens if I mix full red with full blue? I get pink, purple, fuchsia. I don't know. I'm really bad with colors. If I mix red and green together, I get yellow. So it's just kind of a thing. Guys, I don't memorize any of these types of colors. I just open up my color picker and I pick the one I like. This bar here, this is your alpha, so it's your transparencies. Okay. With white background though, even if I adjust this transparency way down, it's still going to pretty much look the exact same because there's only white behind it. Just a couple little things there to think about, a little bit of a review from yesterday. Now there's one other issue that I don't necessarily like, and that's that I like that gray bar to go all the way to the edges, and right now it's not doing that. The margins. And do you remember which tag has automatic margins built into it? Yeah, there was 8 pixels automatically attached to one of the elements. And so these are all of the tags that currently exist. Which one of them has that margin that's built into it that's preventing us from going to like edge-to-edge display? It's going to be on the body itself. So what we did yesterday is we were like, okay, let's go to the body and let's turn off the margin. So we'll say margin 0. And what that does is it brings it all the way to the edges, but I still have this like weird space up here. I have that. I like that. Let's see if we can't figure out the right color. Okay, we'll start with just like plain old blue, and then let's adjust it to Maybe something more like that. It's probably pretty close to the color. Maybe a little harder to see here. So let's make the font weight something like bold. And I gotta add a little more saturation to that. So pretty decent start. If I want, I could add just a little bit of padding to this. Maybe do something like our 10 pixels of padding. And that's gonna pop that up a little bit. So I kind of like that. That might be a little bit much. So let's go with like 8 pixels. I'm pretty happy with that as a close approximation of my mock. And I'm ready to move on to my next section. Sound good? We have our div, we have our header. The next section that we're looking at is this card. Before we worry about like an animated flip and all of that other stuff, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just be like, let's give ourselves a div. We'll call this class card. And then I'll just put in like a placeholder where I'm like, card will go here. And so I'm just, we call this stubbing out. So it's like, oh, I'm going to drop in a little placeholder for myself to come back to. And then underneath the card, I'm going to have, we'll do another div. And then here we'll add a class and we'll call this our buttons. And we'll say buttons here. And there I can already say like, okay, look, at least they're stacking horizontally, vertically, I mean. And so I'm getting the right type of layout just with very simple placeholder text before I'm like, let's go find an image. Let's go find all that other stuff. One of the other things that we can do is we can add, Mick has here, these are like messages, whether you're too high or you're too low. And that looks like that prints out down below the buttons. So we could put in another div and we could say class messages. That's where I'm going to put all my messages that come based upon the guess. And so here, again, real simple, messages here. And I'm stacking, so I'm like, okay, I like that. I'm not moved to the center of the screen. I'm not getting the same styles applied as my header division. I think I have a pretty good starting template now. With that kind of put together, let's grab an image. And I want you guys dig deep, see if you can remember from yesterday, how do I put an image on the page? Yep, copy the link, drop it in. So here's a bunch of cards. Just click on images and we'll grab a random back of a playing card. That one looks fancy. You like that one? Okay, so right click, we're gonna say copy image link. And what tag do I use to jump in that image link? Image, and it's IMG, not IMA. It's the M tag. And where do I put the link? Does it go in the source or does it go in the alt? Yeah, in the source. Oh, that card's massive. Way too big. What goes in the alt? The alt is the message that shows up if the image is broken. So this is like the back of a card. It's just a description of what the picture is. Now, how do I get that card to shrink way, way down? Because that's way too big. Yep, let's go over into CSS land. Okay. And let's do our card image. All right, so card image, let's set the max width to 100%. So at least my card won't be bigger than my screen now. Now that card is still quite large. We can say that's the max width, but let's set the actual width to like 300 pixels. That'll be a little bit smaller. I could set the width to something like 60%. That's going to be 60% of the view, which I kind of like that. It looks pretty good, in my opinion. Something that I might also want to do is I might want to move that image to the center of the screen. That's not going to go to the center of the screen if I do text align here. And the reason why is because I'm targeting the image right now in CSS. I need to target the card and tell its content to go to the center of the screen. So if you look at kind of the hierarchy of your HTML, I can say, hey, let's go to this division and let's make the content in the division go to the center of the screen. But if you are looking at just the image itself, it says, cool, based upon the display type that I am taking up the amount of space that I need to take up and no more. That's a gotcha for a lot of people. So if I do something like dot card, I can say text align center, and that should center that up. I don't necessarily like how close the card is to the top of the header, and I don't like how close it is to the bottom there. So how can I give some extra space around? Let's try padding. Let's do padding of like 20 pixels. And that makes my card smaller. It kind of looked like it accomplished what I wanted it to, but that's basically stuffing a lot more packing peanuts into the box, but not necessarily saying nothing can touch the box. So padding is on the inside, margin is on the outside. If it gives you the visual appearance that you're looking for, cool. But that is just one of those things to be aware of. Here's something fancy. What if I'm like, man, that's the back of the card that we have, but it's not the back of the card that I want. And let's say, but that's the image I have to use. But the designers came to us and they were like, make it blue. And you're like, what? I have to make it blue? You make it blue. You're the designer. And they're like, nah, we want it red. Make it blue programmatically. Something you can do, just as a fancy like CSS thing, is we can write a filter and we can adjust the hue by like 100 degrees. And we can change the color of things. Just like super fancy, right? So that's 100 degrees. If we do like 150 degrees, no, let's do like 250, blue, right? If I go 360, I brought it all the way back to the exact same color, right? Because it's a color wheel. So I'm adjusting it around the color wheel. And so just something fancy you can do. So I don't know, like 200 degrees. I kind of like the color of that. That looks halfway decent. It's maybe not quite the right color of this text here, but we could use like a little color picker and select those things and get them to match perfectly, which I'll show here in a little bit. Cool. I've got a card. I've got high-low. I've kind of, a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, hopefully getting some review in. Feeling pretty good about what we've written so far. I want a button. And a button is not something we talked about at all yesterday. We'll want to talk about that today. That'll be brand new. Okay. And I have my messages that are going to come. These only show up when you are making choices. So that is one of those things that it's like, okay, that needs to be dynamically driven. And when we say dynamically driven, it is based upon some sort of action that the user takes. I want to update the screen. The only way to figure that piece out is to introduce JavaScript. And so we saw yesterday in JavaScript, or in the console, I could write some JavaScript and it would do some cool stuff. We were able to like attack our enemy and do all that fanciness, right? And so we talked through some of the basic concepts of JavaScript, but we didn't talk about how to tie JavaScript back into your web page. In order to do this, we're going to need to first create a JavaScript file, and then we're going to have to link in the JavaScript file. Very similar to CSS, but we will use a different tag. We're not going to use the link tag. We're going to use the script tag. And I'll show you where we do that, but let's create our file first. So let's call this, we'll call this game.js. Okay. So we're building a little game. We're going to put all of our code in this one file, just plain old JavaScript file. And if I want to include this JavaScript file back into my HTML, what I'll do is I'll go down to kind of the bottom of my HTML, and I'm going to add a script tag. So if I type in script and press tab, it's going to give you essentially, your brackets around your script here. And what we can do is we can come here inside of these angle brackets, and we can write source. So very much like an image. And we're going to point to the file that we want to include. So we called it game.js. And what that's going to do is that's going to go and load in that JavaScript file and make it ready for us. So that way, as we start writing JavaScript, it actually shows up on the page. When I say shows up on the page, the JavaScript itself isn't going to show up on the page. And if I just try to write something like hello, VS Code's going to get mad at me. It's going to give me these red squiggles. And if you ever see red squiggles, you basically are doing something wrong, right? It's very much like, Microsoft Word or whatever. It's like, hey, that's an error, right? That's something misspelled. JavaScript, when you see that red squiggle, that's like, hey, something isn't quite right. That's probably not going to work. And when the browser loads this, it's probably going to throw you an error. Let's go ahead and hit and right click inspect. We'll open up our developer tools. We'll go to our console. And inside of our console here, we're going to get this message that says, hello is not defined. These are some warnings. Let's see if I can turn those off. So we only have to look at errors for today. Cool. So that's JavaScript saying, hey man, I don't know what the word hello is. That doesn't work. So that's never going to show up on your page for you. I can do JavaScripty things though. We're going to do this. And I can do something like 1 + 1. And I don't get any errors in my console, but nothing shows up on the page and nothing shows up here in the console. So I want to show you guys specifically when it comes to like software development, oftentimes as we're coding something out, we want to be able to see what's happening. And we don't necessarily want the user experience to see what we see as the developers. The console is essentially our place to send messages to ourselves to be like, this worked. I got here. I did a thing. And in order to use the console, what we're going to do is we're going to say, let me do that real quick. We're going to write out console, and we're going to log. And then what we can do is we can put in some sort of message here. And what that's going to give us is, oh no, I turned off my, not errors, info? Yeah, errors and info. Okay, cool. So my console log, I should be able to send messages over to myself. So I could be like, hey, this is the game.js file. Right? Which is pretty cool. Now I know, hey, cool, your JavaScript stuff is working, right? If I want to know what the answer to 1 + 1 is, I can say console.log, and I should get the number 2 spits out to the console, okay? So again, that console is the place for me to be able to test a bunch of things before I have to like write a button that the user can click on. And so you're going to do a lot of those types of things. I'm also going to do this. Let's pick the minimum of the max or the width here. We'll say 60% of the screen or like 250 pixels. That'll look a little bit better so that card's not so massive. And what I did here is I basically just said the width will either be 60% of the screen or 250 pixels, whichever one is smaller. So got some good JavaScript started. We got some good CSS started. Okay, we understand the console log. Do we have any questions up to this point? We are going to build the start of the game. And the start of the game is going to be something like we did yesterday, where we're just going to play it in the console. Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that I just write my JavaScript code correctly first before I start tying in like complexities with there's a button you have to click on, there's a card you got to flip over, there's all of this other stuff, right? It's like, no, I just want to know, can I pick a number and store that in memory? And then can I guess what the number is? And if the number was high, tell me it was high. And if the number was low, tell me it was low. And if I guess the right number, say you got the right number. And I'm going to do all of that in the console today to start, very much like we built our little console game. But this time we're going to write the code over in VS Code, and we'll play the game over here in the console. I'll show you how we do all that.